Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I have a book review for you today. This is Empire of Blue Water, Captain Morgan's Great Pirate Army, the Epic Battle for the Americas, and the Catastrophe that Ended the Outlaws' Bloody Reign by Stephan Talty. I'm bringing you this book today because I likes pirate stories, I do. So this Captain Morgan, this is in fact Captain Henry Morgan. Yes, the guy on the rum bottle, if you're familiar with those. Let's see, Morgan's Rum. Anyway, so this story is about Captain Morgan. And the reason that I'm interested in this story is because this takes place in the late 1600s. And just to place what's going on in world history, England had had a revolution. They chopped off King Charles' head and put more or less Cromwell on the throne as Lord Protector, but not as king. After he died, the monarchy was reestablished, and then you have persecution of Presbyterians in Scotland. You have a lot of things going on, and towards the end of the 1600s, you have the Salem witch trials here in the 13 colonies, mostly in Massachusetts. And then you have the Glorious Revolution over in England with the removal of, I believe it's James II from the throne, and you have the installation of William and Mary, who were more friendly to Protestants, especially Presbyterians, and the horrible persecution that they suffered came to an end. Now, Empire of Blue Water, this is talking about the Americas and the struggle between mainly England and Spain that was going on in the Americas, right around the Caribbean. So Spain had a ton of colonies all on the northern coast of South America and some of the Caribbean islands, and along into Central America, along the Isthmus of Panama, and into what is now Mexico. Lots of colonies on both the northern coast of South America and the Pacific coast of South America and Central America. And Captain Morgan involved himself in fighting the Spaniards in a lot of those places. And here is the table of contents. It has, like any good piratey book should, it has maps, and it introduces us to the Lost City. Now, Captain Morgan was based out of Port Royal, Jamaica. And Port Royal suffered a horrible earthquake centuries ago, and there's actually ruins of the old city still under the waters of the harbor there. But this was the world of a lot of pirates, English pirates, but also pirates tended to be a little bit international in their composition. Some of them men without a country, but just looking for an opportunity. And certainly, we're not going to give pirates a pass for robbing and stealing and pillaging and all those things because they had nothing else to do. But you have to understand the economic hardship. There was not much of a middle class in those days, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity if you weren't born into it. And that's important to remember. And then, of course, all of the get-rich-quick schemes of the colonies in the New World attracted a lot of people of different motives, let's say that way. And then they found out that things weren't so easy as they had been led to believe. And some turned to piracy in order to be able to pay bills. And Captain Morgan was kind of involved in that, and he set up a lot of what could be considered piratical cruises, raids on various Spanish towns. And the reason he was doing this, he thought that he was furthering English interests and also inflating his pocket a bit. But he did these raids not with the express approval of the crown. That's one of the interesting things about it. But after the fact, the Crown was so impressed with the results of his raids, they kind of gave him a pass. And this is his story. And it's really quite interesting. And here's a timeline of Captain Morgan's life. And then this is a really excellent map of the Caribbean, and it shows the raids of Henry Morgan in the years 1663 to 1670. So not really a lot of years of activity, but his raids were extremely successful, more so than anyone had ever imagined was possible. And then we have a couple of other maps. We have the Isthmus of Panama down here. This is Portobello. And here we see the Isthmus of Panama zoomed out. And we see that Henry Morgan went all the way across the isthmus to attack Panama itself on the Pacific side. This is one of the most amazing things. So 100 years earlier, Sir Francis Drake had done exactly the same thing. Marched his men across the land. Actually, did he march his men across the land? I don't recall now. I think he marched his men across the land, stole ships, and sailed down the Pacific side. And Henry Morgan did something very similar, except I think he just marched back. But you'll have to read it. So I read this about a year ago, so I don't have all the details memorized, and that's okay. If you are familiar with the Pirate History podcast, Matt has done an amazing job with that podcast, and he's done a lot of very careful reading, and then he weaves a very good story afterwards, a good yarn. And the introduction, this talks about Port Royal, and Port Royal was very important. If you've seen the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, it kind of mentions that it takes place in Port Royal. That's where we first meet some of the main characters in the first movie. And yes, Port Royal was very important. Of course, Pirates of the Caribbean is complete fantasy, but it's just meant to be fun. Here is history. And for you history nerds out there and you maritime nerds like me, this would be very interesting. And then one thing that I started doing very soon, around the time I started reading this, was I started keeping a reading journal. And this is just a moleskin notebook, just their typical size, the classic size. And so I started keeping a journal, and on each chapter, just making a few notes of important points. You think I would have read this more before I gave this presentation, so I would have got those details right. But anyway, again, this is to wet your whistle about this book, and recommend. You don't have to buy it, of course. Just go to your local library. This is a well enough established book that a library should have it or have access to it. They could probably order it for you if your local library doesn't have it from one of the nearby libraries. And I made some notes here that I needed to keep track of the various English monarchs from Henry VIII through through George I. It was helpful to me, even though this is way beyond Henry Morgan's life, way back here and up to George I. Still helpful for me to see all those things. And just to keep some notes. So I used a lot of ink. You don't have to, do things like that and put quite so much time into all your lettering and all that, but I just wanted to keep a record of what I had read so I could review it at a later time. And it helped me remember it at the time anyway, when I was reading it, to keep my thoughts organized. But this is a great book. I read Sir Francis Drake after this book. I probably should have read Sir Francis Drake first. Drake and Morgan have a lot of similarities, but the most wildly successful pirate in the history of piracy wasn't Blackbeard, certainly wasn't William Kidd, other famous names you may have heard of. It was Captain Morgan, and whether or not he actually was a pirate. Now that's a question you should ask. if you get into this book. Oh, and there's the ISBN if you want to look at that right there. All right, well, that's enough for that. Hope you really enjoy this review, and I hope that this interests you in checking this book out. All right, everybody, have a great day.